So, you're thinking about becoming a pro wrestler, are you? Yeah, might not be a bad idea. Then again, it might not be the best idea. I just wish that when I was in your shoes, I had somebody that I could listen to that could tell me what it was really like getting in to the business of professional wrestling on the independent scene. I wish that I had somebody to tell me before I got into it the things that I would go through, the trials and tribulations, the sacrifices that I would have to make so that I could have weighed out my options, whether it was worth it or not. If you're one of those people, or if you're simply just one of the people who wonder what this life is like getting into pro wrestling, then this video is for you. So I'm going to start this off. How did I even develop this passion for pro wrestling? It was video games. When I was a kid, I played Royal Rumble for Super Nintendo. Something about this video game just really drew me in, and Bret Hart was my guy. I couldn't get enough of Bret Hart. I was flipping through the channels one day and I saw Bret Hart on TV, and I thought to myself, hey, that's Bret Hart. That's the guy that I'm always playing on that video game. So I had to watch it. And from that moment, I was intrigued. This had to have been 1992, 1993. I think I was 7 or 8 years old at this point. And from there, it was just like wrestling was my new obsession. Now, as a kid, I never really thought that I could be a pro wrestler. This was just a fantasy of mine. I always imagined what it would be like to be a pro wrestler, but I never really envisioned that I would become one. Now, as I got older, I still had that obsession for wrestling. I'm talking every day. I wore wrestling t-shirts to school. Anybody that knew who I was knew that I was a wrestling fan. Now, keep in mind, back then, you didn't have to be secretive about being a wrestling fan, because this is when wrestling was at its all-time peak. We're talking like Attitude Era. We're talking the Monday Night Wars. Everybody watched wrestling. And even if you didn't watch wrestling, if you were scrolling through the channel and you saw somebody like Stone Cold Steve Austin on television, you knew to stop and you watched, because you knew something good was about to happen. Now, I never really thought growing up that I would become a wrestler, but if there was one thing I was sure of, I was going to do everything that I possibly could to look like a pro wrestler. That was my goal. I didn't have to be one, but I wanted to turn heads. I wanted to be a really big guy that everybody looked at and thought, what does he do? He's got to be somebody. So I started lifting weights. And it's funny because as Bret Hart was my favorite wrestler, he was also my goal when I first got into lifting weights. I used to tell myself, if I could just get the size of Bret Hart, if I could just look like Bret Hart, then I'd be content. You know, it'd be nothing but maintenance from that point. But of course, that didn't happen. You know, once I finally reached the size of Bret Hart, then I started looking at guys like Batista and Ultimate Warrior. I'm thinking, no, I got to get that big now. I'm too small. But that's a whole nother story. Anybody who lifts weights can probably relate to that. Moving on to when I finally decided that I was going to pursue wrestling. It was about 2012. I had been doing physical labor, plumbing work, most of my adulthood. And I decided it was time. I was going to give this a shot. So I packed up and I moved with my girlfriend to Atlanta with a goal of training to be a pro wrestler. Unfortunately, it didn't work out too much because I had to move back about, I'll say it was about 8 months later. Um, I went to WWA 4 and hung out a good bit, and I had plans of joining. I like to watch. I studied them. I watched everything that they were doing. So it was in my mind. I was halfway there. But at the time, I was working at a gym. I was doing personal training and selling memberships, and the money was just not coming in. I had quit plumbing, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a job plumbing while I was there due to the distance that I would have to drive. Companies didn't want to pay enough, so I thought I'll just do personal training. Well, that didn't work out so well. I ended up going broke and had to move back home to South Carolina, where I was originally from. So I came back, and that was kind of it. The dream of pursuing professional wrestling and becoming a wrestler kind of died off there. And it kind of just stayed in the back of my mind. And it's something that I just never thought that was going to happen until I was, say, around 2019, maybe 2018. was scrolling on Facebook and I saw there was a local promotion. Well, not so local. It was in Statesboro, Georgia, which was about an hour and a half from where I was. But I saw some people that they had trained that had came from that facility. I put it in my Google Maps to see what the distance was. I saw it was an hour and a half, and it was just like that. I just was like, I have to do this. Now, in making this decision, I'm not really sure that I had all of the support that I needed. I know that my girlfriend at the time was supportive, although she probably shouldn't have been. Um, we had actually just had a son, so that was going to make things even more difficult. This was a big sacrifice that I was just ready to take, and she did support me for that. My mom also was there to support me. I'm not sure how much she really believed in me, but she knew that this was something that I had been passionate about my entire life, and she was going to be there to support me one way or the other, whether it worked out or not. So I was grateful for that. And getting into it, I thought wrestling was going to be a lot easier than what it really was. You hear the stories all the time from wrestlers about how, wrestling's not fake and it hurts and this and that. And you think, okay, yeah, I'm sure there's some hardships. I'm sure there's a little bit of pain. Accidents happen, but they're probably exaggerating this to a degree because you want to make it seem as believable as possible, right? That couldn't have been anything anything further from the truth because I learned really quick that it hurt. So what happened was I contacted the guy, the promoter for this promotion, and it was through Instagram. I messaged him. He gave me the price. He wanted $2,000, and I'd get 8 weeks of training, which I know is really quick. But hey, I didn't have very many options. There's nothing around here, so I was going to take whatever I could find. I wanted to step into a wrestling ring, and that's all that really mattered to me. So I showed up that Saturday with $50 to do a tryout. They had me run some drills. They had me do a bunch of different little things, run the ropes. Before I even stepped in the ring, though, really, they had me running through the parking lot doing push-ups. They wanted to test my ability, even though I know they looked at me and the trainer looked at me and he knew that I was going to be able to handle this, which probably explains why 20 minutes later I was already in the ring taking bumps. Now it's funny because I've listened to other people talk about their experiences and where they trained and how they came up, and I've heard guys talk about training 4 or 5 weeks before they even took their first bump. I was taking suplexes on my tryout. So like I said, I learned really quick that this stuff hurt and that it wasn't fake. I thought a wrestling ring would have a little bit more give to it, some spring. I was looking for springs. There was no springs. Now this gym was not even a gym. It was a building, and it wasn't. The ceilings were really low. If you were going to try to take a dive off the top rope, you are going to have to kind of squat when you stood on the turnbuckles. So this was no gym. It was just a beat down hole in the wall building that maximum capacity probably could have fit 75 people. Hey, it was something. I was just stoked to finally be in a wrestling ring. I was on the way to living my dream. Now when I first started training, it was a lot. It was a lot. There I will say the first couple weeks I thought that I may have been over my head with things because I didn't realize just how much of an art and how much science there was to putting on a wrestling match. I learned everything about how a wrestling match is constructed. I learned holds, so many things that I had been watching wrestling my entire life, but I never understood or noticed just how in sync everything was and that how everything was always done a certain way. It was so much more than what I thought it was just from watching these videos and these wrestling matches for 25, 30 years. And in learning all these new things, it was overwhelming. Every single thing was so much more than I expected. How you run the ropes mattered, how you lock up mattered, which side you worked on a person mattered. You had to know how to take moves, you had to know how to give moves, and you had to know how to work with your partner to make these moves look correct and be correct, or you could really hurt yourself, which happened many a times. The hardest part physically for wrestling was definitely the pain. It wasn't the hour and a half drive, it was the pain. And it was funny because the adrenaline would be so high while you were there training that by the time you left, you really didn't feel anything. But you took that hour and a half drive back home, and the moment you stepped out of your car or your truck, you felt it. That first step getting out of the truck was the worst. For the first 8 weeks of wrestling, my throat hurt, not because I was yelling or anything. It wasn't like a normal sore throat. This was a feeling like somebody had just grabbed me by the throat, and damn near choked me out. And the reason was because I was working these muscles in my neck and in my throat, which had never been worked like this. Every bump that I took, I was tucking my chin, and just the impact was working these muscles. I could not swallow without being in pain for the first 7 to 8 weeks. My throat hurt. I thought it was never going to end. And I guess my body finally adjusted to it. My back felt the same way, running the ropes. But we didn't use ropes. We used steel cables with garden hose over it. So hitting these ropes was terrible. I mean, I had welts on my back. Is everything hurt all the time. My foot hurt. Um, I had a bad foot that was killing me because I had previously broken an ankle, and I have a steel plate in my ankle, so that foot was always bothering me. My back was killing me. My throat, my head was pounding. It was a lot, but it was something that I was determined to stick through with. There was nothing. There was no amount of pain that was going to make me stop. It was going to take something really serious. It was going to be the mental thing that broke me before it was going to be the pain. I knew that. Now, aside from the physical pain, mentally, the hardest part was just being away from my family. Like I said, I had a newborn son, and I had a girlfriend that I had been with for a very long time. So it was killing me to be away from them. I was training twice a week and was doing shows once a week. So I was wrestling 3 times a week, technically. Every Wednesday, I would drive after work straight to Statesboro to do my training. It would run about 2 to 3 hours, just depending on how everyone was feeling. And then I'd drive right back home, and I'd get up the next morning for more work. And then Saturdays is when we would do training again. And then we would also have a show right after training, which was a terrible idea. But it was giving me the ring time that I needed to get the experience. So I was all about it. But you can imagine we had to set everything up. I had an hour and a half drive there. So basically, Saturday mornings, I would get up, I would get my workout in, I'd get prepared, and I'd be out the door, and I wouldn't be back home until midnight. I'd be gone 12 to 15 hours every Saturday. And that was very hard for me. And I know it was very hard for my girlfriend at the time. And it sucked because I was missing out. I was missing out on time with my family, and I really wanted that. But this was something that I just felt like I had to pursue, and I hoped with everything that it was going to pay off one day for all of us. Now, as far as the guys that I was wrestling and training with, some of them were welcoming, some of them were there to help, while there were also some who had the egos. There were a lot of politics, to say the least. You couldn't really trust anyone, is the first thing that I learned really quick. They say there's no friends in the wrestling business. It's kind of true. It's more of a partnership at times, but you never really have true friends. Even the ones that you think are your true friends, when it's all said and done with, they're not. They're there for the same reason, and who would expect anything less, right? I mean, that's why we get into it. We want to be the best that we can. We didn't get into the business to just be one of the boys. We want to be the guy. At least if you're serious about it, that should be your mentality. So I can't knock anyone for that. But there were some shady people in all of the places that I worked. And I learned really quick to just keep my mouth shut and just focus on my own thing and nothing else. Now, I probably wrestled there for a good 2 or 3 months before I actually started to feel like one of the boys. Before I started to feel like I was gaining respect. You know, I had to really prove myself, and I had to show that I could put asses in seats, which I did pretty well. I would say that I probably did better than anyone else at this promotion at the time. I kind of quickly became the guy. I wasn't walking around with the title, but the one thing that I was hearing at every show, after every show, and the one comment that I was getting in my DMs more than anyone was, "Why are you working here? You look like you should be somewhere. You should be a star. You shouldn't be working here." So those little comments alone made everything okay with me just kind of being at the bottom of the card in the beginning, because I knew that I was shining brighter than the majority of the guys that I was working with. Now, my very first match, this took place at a bar. It's a pretty big bar, and it was outdoors. It's called Coach's Corner, and it was kind of cool because my very first show, Buff Bagwell was also on the card. So I got to meet Buff Bagwell. I thought that was really cool. I met him backstage. Pretty sure he had just gotten through smoking a joint. He was with Johnny Swinger. Yeah, it was Buff Bagwell and Johnny Swinger. They had a little trailer out back, and they kind of stuck to themselves the whole time. Pretty sure they were just in there getting high the whole time. But he finally came out when we were all going over everything, and I went up to him, introduced myself. He introduced himself to me as Marcus, which I thought was pretty cool. So I was like, hell yeah, this is a guy that I grew up with. I can remember being a kid watching this guy, wanting to be like him, and now here I am wrestling in the same ring as him. So that was awesome, especially for my first show. Now the first match, it was a gauntlet match. I was the last man, so it made me look pretty weak, to be honest. And the guy that was winning this was a very small guy, out of shape, just didn't look the part at all. And he had already went through like it might have been 4 guys. I think I was the 5th guy that came out, and I gave him a run for his money. I put it on him, but he still beat me, and I thought that just kind of made me look weak coming in. But as a new guy with only 8 weeks of experience at this time, what else was to be expected? It was still a great experience. I had a couple friends there, some family. It's a good memory and something I'll never forget. Now I can remember before the match being nervous, being really nervous, but it was odd because it was like the moment that I came out, all of that was gone. The nervousness, it completely disappeared. It was like I was a whole different person. It was almost felt like something that I had been doing all my life. I guess I had just been envisioning this moment my whole life, that by the time that it finally was there happening, it was just so organic. I just fell right into it. Now, as far as the pay for this match, to be honest, I'm not even sure that I was paid. I want to say that I might have made like $20. Might as well have been the good old hot dog and a handshake. It wasn't anything. If I made anything, it was like $20. This show, luckily, wasn't so far from where I lived. It was only about a 30-minute drive, because not only did we do shows at our training location, but we also bounced around Georgia to different towns and cities. So I was lucky that this one was a little bit closer, and it made it better for me too, because people that wanted to see me wrestle that I was close with didn't have to travel so far. Not only that, they didn't have that excuse. They couldn't say, that's a little too far for me. I was like, hey, it's just right here in Savannah. Now, after my first match, I was I was on cloud nine. You know, it's funny because I took a bump actually in this match. In my very first match, I injured myself. I took a bump. I didn't wear my elbow pads. I thought I look better without my elbow pads. I'm not going to wear them for the match. I don't want to hide these guns, you know what I'm saying? So I didn't wear my elbow pads. I took a bump, landed on my elbow, and by the end of the night, my elbow had swelled up. You'd have thought that I had a tennis ball implanted into my elbow, just a full sack of liquid. Um, bursitis is what it's called. And it took 3 or 4 days for this swelling to go down. I thought I was going to have to go have it cut open and drained, but luckily it went down on its own. But that was like a nagging injury. I had to wear elbow pads. As a matter of fact, I doubled up on elbow pads for quite a while because any bump that I took, if I hit my elbow too hard, it would spike right back up. So it took some time for that to recover, but I learned really quick, wear your elbow pads. Now the travel varied. You know, it was always going to be for training. It was always going to be at least that hour and a half drive there and an hour and a half back. But sometimes there were shows where, you know, we would be 3 hours away from my home, 3, 4 hours. I think the furthest I ever traveled was about 4 hours. I wasn't really going to travel much further than that for the money that I was making. Because after all, I was lucky if I was leaving shows with a $20 bill. You know, some bigger shows I might have made 50. Uh, you know, there were some where I made 100, but it really depended on just how big the house was, and you know, things like that. To be honest, I kind of looked at it all like it was more of an investment or just a hobby, because there were plenty of times where doing these shows, I was doing good if the money that I made covered my gas for the trip. You know, so it was strenuous. There were some weekends where we would even double up shows. You know, we may do a show on a Friday night and then come back and do another show on Saturday noonish. It really varied. So it could be strenuous at times, but again, I was gonna take any opportunity that I could to get in the ring, and I was beating myself up just to get that ring time in. Now combining this with my laborious job, you can imagine my body was getting really beat up. I was sore all the time, and I was going to work having to do a lot of heavy lifting. I'm changing out water heaters all the time. I'm having to crawl into tight spaces, and my body is stiff. It's killing me. I mean, there were times I cracked my tailbone, and then the next day to work, I went. You know, and the first job of the day was crawling into crawl space under a house to make a leak repair. So it was bad. You know, I was really going through some uh, some tough pain and some tough times, but I was determined to do whatever I had to do to get to where I wanted to be wrestling. Now, as far as promoters kind of varied. You know, sometimes you had some good promoters, sometimes you had some bad ones. Personally, the main promoter that I had, the one where I came up and I wrestled for the first 2 years and had trained at, this promoter was the shadiest guy I've ever met in my life. I'm not going to name drop him, but let's just say he's notorious in Georgia. Anybody that knows him, if you mention his name, you're going to get a look. Like if you tell anybody that you wrestled for him, you're going to get that look like, no, not him. And it's, yeah, it's him. Um, so it is what it is. I did what I had to do to gain the experience that I needed. And this guy did give me that opportunity. He wasn't much of a trainer. He just taught me the basics, really, you know, arm bar, lock up, little bit of chain wrestling, just the basics, the simple basics. Everything else I learned were through guys that came through there that had trained somewhere else. He wasn't much of a trainer at all, to be completely honest. He didn't know much, and he couldn't wrestle to save his life, if you were to ask me, and a lot of others. But he had some guys coming through there all the time, and he had some steady guys working there that had trained at some better places. Um, One of them in particular had trained with the Funks, and I learned a lot from him. Matter of fact, I probably had some of my best matches with this guy. So, although the trainer himself wasn't good, I was surrounded by some people who I was really able to learn some things from. Now, again, there was no money in this. And if you're thinking about getting started in wrestling, that's the first thing you need to understand is there's not any money in this. You're going to be lucky if you can cover your gas money. So make sure you got a full-time job. Make sure that you're not getting into this thinking that you're just going to wrestle every weekend or you're going to wrestle a couple times a week. Because even if you do that, and even if you can make it work, the mileage you're going to put on your vehicle, the amount of gas that you're going to put into your tank, and the amount of abuse your body is going to have to take just to make a couple bucks to get to the next town is not going to be worth it. So have a full-time job, have a backup plan, because this is not going to make you rich overnight. You're not going to get anything out of this. You need to understand that this is going to be more of a hobby and an investment when you start off. And you also need to factor in the money that you're going to need to spend on your gear. Boots are not cheap. You can buy some cheap regular boots from a place like High Spots, or you can get some custom made boots. Even a cheap pair of High Spots is going to run you $150 to $200. If you want a custom pair of boots, one that's going to fit you correctly and one that's going to be, feel good and last, then you're going to need to invest some money. You're looking at least $300 for a good set of boots. And gear as well. You need to have gear. I wrestled with lots of guys for years who never even got gear, still wrestling in basketball shorts and a t-shirt. And that was one thing that really pissed me off more than anything, was guys wrestling in t-shirts. There's no excuse for it. I don't care how fat you are. If you're fat, embrace it. If you got a problem with being fat, then go to the gym. And that's another thing that bothered the hell out of me, is 90% of the guys that I was wrestling with didn't even work out. They sat home, they played video games, and they ate Cheetos all night long, and then would show up the next day ready to have a wrestling match. And the ones that weren't doing that were up drinking all night the night before. It was ridiculous. It was like the only thing they wanted to do was show up and train and get great at doing wrestling moves, but they didn't want to put in the work when they left. It doesn't. That's something that you need to understand. My wrestling skills were never the greatest, but it was everything that I applied outside of the gym that made me a great wrestler, that gave me the look, that gave me the charisma, that gave me the confidence. Going to the gym, knowing how to eat, eating when and what you're supposed to. You've got to master these things down. Wrestling, I don't care what anyone says or where if anyone thinks that the business is gone to this day. I'm telling you now, wrestling is 90% image. If you don't have the look, you're not going to go far at all. There's some exceptions. You got your Sami Zayns, but do you want to be a Sami Zayn? Do you want to be a Sami Zayn, or do you want to be a Batista? Do you want to be a Randy Orton? Do you want to be a John Cena? Those are the guys that I want to be like, not Sami Zayn, not even CM Punk. So if you're gonna be getting involved in wrestling, commit fully. Don't go halfway. Be a wrestler. If you're not gonna go to the gym and you're gonna be fat, then do me a favor and get fat as hell. And you better be tall. Be a big guy one way or another. We got enough small guys. They don't stand out anymore. If you want to boost your chances of turning heads and putting asses in seats, look like somebody. Now, for the first year, I didn't really have a gimmick. I didn't really have a personality. I went by my name. They called me Big Mike. And that kind of just stemmed from when I was a trainer. They would involve me in some matches, not when I was a trainer, but when I was a trainee. They would involve me in some matches, utilize me, and then there are a few times they just name dropped me and they called me Big Mike, because that's what everybody called me at the time. So by the time they finally introduced me as one of the wrestlers, as part of the show, everyone pretty much already knew me as Big Mike. So they just kind of ran with it. I didn't have much say in it. It wasn't what I wanted. I wanted a character, but that's just kind of how it all unfolded. And like I said again, this promoter, he was a kind of my way or the highway type of guy, so I just had to do what he told me to do. Now, after about a year of wrestling under Big Mike, I finally changed things up. What happened was I had an injury. I tore my bicep. So that put me out for probably 3 or 4 months. Um, I wasn't able to train. I wasn't able to do anything. It was terrible. I wasn't able to work out. I could only do my legs. It sucked real bad. I was going crazy. This was probably the most depressing time of my life because I was removed from the two things that I love doing more than anything, and that was working out and wrestling. So it was a really hard time for me. And during this time, my life just kind of felt like it was coming down. So I had a lot of time to think about what I wanted to do when I returned. So I created this character and I came back when I returned. I was Crew Lavish. And I had a completely different look. I had shaved my head bald as it is now, and just a completely different gimmick. I had all my phrases, I had all my merchandise ready. I was ready to do this, and I was ready to do it different. I was introduced as a completely different person, completely different gimmick, and everybody just ran with it. And luckily enough, traveling from one city to another, people didn't remember too much, so they just picked it up and everybody ran with it, and it was great. I had this new gimmick, and I was having a blast with it. Now, my persona was the I referred to myself as the aesthetic one, and it eventually manifested into more and more. Eventually I became the mayor of Pound Town, Mr. Gains and Veins. I had all kinds of little sayings, but it was a great time. My gimmick was, the guy who thought he was better than everybody. It was the guy that just could take your girl, the guy that was ready to fight anybody. I was a heel, but I was also a face. It was weird. I was doing everything that I could to be heelish, but people loved me because I was entertaining. Like I had the charisma down. My wrestling skills, again, I was not the greatest, but considering my size compared to everybody else, I didn't really have to have the wrestling ability that a lot of these smaller guys had. I was a powerhouse guy. I didn't really have to take bumps too much anymore because it didn't make sense for a guy my size to be taking bumps. If I was going to take a bump, it was going to mean something, and it was going to be like one, two at the most good bumps towards the end of a match, and a lot of them were going to be bumps by my own clumsiness or something. So yeah, I was having a great time with this character, and I ran with this character until the end of my career, and it never felt unnatural. That was the best part about it. As when they had me being myself, I felt so unnatural, like I was playing a part, which was weird because I was really just myself, but I was trying to be something that I wasn't. Whereas when I created my gimmick and I just got that freedom to do whatever I want, I could finally be myself. All I had to do was just amplify my cockiness and my arrogance and just my charm and my charisma and everything. I just turned it up like 100%. And it was just like no filter. I was going to go out and do whatever I want to whoever I wanted. I was going to say what I want. My goal was to just get a reaction one way or another. I didn't care if they were going to cheer for me or boo me out of the place. I was going to get a reaction. I was going to do everything that I could to get it. Now, promoters loved the gimmick. They loved my look. They loved everything about it. Most of them wanted to use me as a heel because that's what made the most sense. I did have promoters at times try to use me as a face, and it just didn't work. I knew it wouldn't work. I'm a natural heel. Um, and I just don't like being a baby face. The one thing I'll say, if you're wanting to be a fan favorite and you're wanting to be a baby face, is get ready for more of a challenge because it's a lot more challenging to make people love you than it is to make them hate you. So you got to figure out your character and you got to know how to do it because I had been a heel for so long that by the time I was turned face, I really didn't know what to do anymore because everything that I did was with heelish tendencies. Now, eventually, I ended up leaving this promotion. This was during the COVID time. Um, we started doing matches, and we didn't have anyone in the building, which was very weird for me. It was hard for me to come out, and we were putting these videos online, and it was just hard for me to get into character without a crowd. This was probably the most awkward time for me and the most uncomfortable time, and the time that I felt the least confidence going out to the ring was when there was no one there. It just felt silly to me. I didn't like it at all. COVID was kind of the breaking point. It was the start of the breaking point for me working for this promotion where I had trained. This guy was um, he was very up into the whole COVID thing, to say the least, which is something that I wasn't really into. I wasn't wanting to take part of it in any of it, to be honest. I was one of the skeptics. Uh, I refused to do a lot of things, and basically what it led down to was we had a show coming up. This was when we finally started letting people come back in, and we had a show. Now, keep in mind, by this point, I'd already been champion numerous times, but I was not a champion at this current moment. But I was scheduled to win the championship this night at this show, and basically, the I was given an ultimatum about wearing a mask or go home, and it really pissed me off because it made no sense, because they wanted me to wear a mask backstage with the wrestlers before I went into the ring without a mask and wrestled. I told him no, I'm not doing it. He said you got to wear the mask or you got to go. I said peace. I walked away. I got halfway down the road and he was blowing up my phone asking me if I was coming back. And I told him, no, you can find somebody else. And I never went back. So that was the end of that chapter. And it felt good. From there, I ended up leaving that promotion and went to work at a couple other promotions. One became my main promotion where I worked at the majority of the time. And this was actually started by a couple guys that came up at the same place where I was at. And they had left for reasons similar to mine, having a fallout with this guy. And they decided they were going to start their own wrestling promotion. And that's what they did. And by the time I had joined up, they were just starting to really make a buzz. And they surpassed his company by far. They're now pretty much known to be the most, successful wrestling company in this part of Georgia, in the Savannah area. So it was a great group of guys. Um, I wrestled there for a year or two. Had a really good time. I met a lot of good people, made a lot of new connections that led me to be able to wrestle for other promotions. And overall, it was just a great experience. I'm glad that I got to wrestle with all these guys because I learned a lot from them and I had some really good times. But it's also where my body took the most damage. That would be where I fractured my tailbone because one night, instead of having an actual wrestling ring, we had like a boxing ring. And the way a boxing ring is constructed, it has these support not beams but pillars, so to say, that are placed under the ring in sections. And there's one right in the center. And I took a bump. I think I did. I can't remember what I did. It was like a power bomb or something, and I landed right on my tailbone, right on top of this little support structure. And I knew it the moment that I hit. It was terrible, but I still worked through the whole match, got everything out, and still continued to wrestle like that for a while. And luckily, it wasn't a complete fracture. It was just like a hairline fracture. So it didn't stop me. I was going to keep going. Where it all started to kind of fall into a whole new perspective for me was when I realized that I wasn't being used the way that I should be used. I wasn't happy with the booking. I was losing to guys that I felt I had no business losing to, and I was starting to notice that it was a big click. For one, and this is one thing that I will warn you about: do not wrestle for a promotion that has current wrestlers on the roster also promoting the show. If they're the bookers, if you have wrestlers that are booking, you don't want to wrestle there, because this is what'll happen. It's a big buddy system, It's a big clique. It's all politics. You'll find yourself putting guys over that you have no business putting over. You'll find yourself asking yourself, why am I still doing this? Why am I coming here every week to lose a match against Joe Schmo? You know, it there comes a point when you know who should be going over and who shouldn't, and the fans know that as well. So when I'm feeling that way, and I've also got fans coming up to me after every show like, what the hell, bro, why did you lose that match? Then you start to really see things for what they are. And unfortunately, that's just how it is in the wrestling business. A lot of the times you'll have people booking the show that are also wrestling on the card, and 9 times out of 10 they're buddies with the guy that you're wrestling, and they're going to put them over. They're going to put guys over that aren't even regulars as part of the show. They're just a guy that drove 6 hours, and they don't want to pay that guy $200. So instead, they pay him $50, give him a Pepsi and a slice of cold pizza, and tell him that they'll let him go over the biggest guy on the roster. And that'd be me. So it got to a point where it was like 50-50 on my win-loss streak, but I was simply burnt out on losing matches. My body hurt. I had too many injuries, and I wasn't recovering, and it was taking away too much time from my family. And quite honestly, it was taking part in destroying my relationship with my family. And I got to a point where I just realized that this is not for me anymore. This has run its course. Um, I want more than this. So it was a big eye opener for me. Sometimes I wonder to myself what could have happened if I'd stuck through it. But the truth is, at my age, I'm now 41 years old. There's not much more that I could have done in this, and I understand that. And that's another thing that everyone should consider: is age is going to be a factor. And you need to understand that a place like WWE is not going to even look at you and consider you unless you're already an established star. If not, you got to have at least 5 to 10 years of wrestling experience, and you better be under 35. There's not going to be too many guys that come in after 30 that are going to go into WWE, not unless they've made a name for themselves somewhere else. So keep that in mind as well. If you're just looking to get into it for a hobby like I was, and you're not really expecting it to go anywhere, then that's fine, because that was my mentality. Although I'd be lying if I said that I didn't hope that it could go somewhere. And while we're on that subject, there was one opportunity where I could have had a tryout for WWE, and I declined it simply because I knew that I was not ready. And I knew that if I went there and did it, I was just going to make an ass out of myself. And I wanted more training. It was something that I was going to pursue later on down the road if I stuck with it long enough. But, you know, things change. And I went through enough to understand that wrestling was not something that I wanted to continue to pursue, because it took a huge toll on my body. I've now got back pain worse than I've ever had. Extreme back pain. My lower back kills me all the time. Every step I take, I feel crunching. I'm pretty sure I've got a herniated disc. My foot kills me all the time. Uh, it really it really put a beating on my body, and I know it's from wrestling, because I weightlifted for years and never had any problems. And the moment that I started wrestling, I was in pain, and the pain has not gone away since. I've seen chiropractors for years at a time. They helped me with my neck issues that I had, but my back is just on another level, and I've pretty much given up on that ever changing. So now all we can do is stretch and use an inversion table, and hope for the best, and stay out of a wrestling ring. Sometimes I wonder, what if I ever get that itch? Will I do it? And I probably will. But the thing is, I'm going to be like the other guys, and I'm going to tell a promoter straight up, if I'm wrestling for you, I'm not taking any bumps, and I'm going over. If you can't give me that, then I can't give you my time. I don't care about the money because it doesn't pay anything anyways. I'm losing money either way you look at it if I do a wrestling show. So if I'm going to do a wrestling show, I'm going over and I'm not taking any bumps. You better give me somebody that's coming up and just in the training mode because it's going to be a squash match. Now, aside from the back pain, I would say the worst injury that I probably took, and there was a lot. I tore my bicep. I hurt my foot numerous times. I got bursitis in my elbow, my ears. I wrestled a guy. This guy was actually my partner, and he was probably the best friend that I made. Luke was probably the coolest guy that I met in my whole time wrestling. And he was a Marine, and he was the only guy that was near my size. He's in really good shape, big guy. But Luke, you had a hell of a headlock. Every time you put me in that headlock, I went home and I had to take a syringe and drain the blood out of my ears to avoid having cauliflower ears. I can't tell you how many syringes I filled with blood weekend after weekend to get the swelling to go down in these things. I would leave shows some days after being in these headlocks and my ear would be twice the size that it was. We did another show. Now I was wrestling with him at this time. We were in a tag match, but I got body slammed, and then another guy got body slammed onto me. And when he came down and he threw his arms out, his elbow hit me right in the lip, split my lip wide open. My tooth went right through it. So after that match, I had to go to the hospital and get my lip stitched up. It cost me about $1,200 for a show that paid me $50. So keep in mind that the injuries are going to come, and they're going to come all the time. The worst of the worst, I would say, was when I was fighting a really, really fat guy, and he went to give me a Mishino driver. And when he didn't fully rotate me because I'm a big guy. He's a really big guy. So as he's coming down and he's trying to rotate me, my head hits his gut and I don't fully rotate. I come down and I spike my head. And for about 3 seconds, I thought I'm paralyzed. I felt a jolt. I couldn't move for a few seconds. Everything tingled in my body. And luckily, it didn't. Luckily, it didn't kill me because it could have. I've watched the video over. I've got still pictures of it. If I can find a picture of it, I'll put it right here so you can see it. But that was the moment where I thought that I had just really hurt myself. I managed to finish the match. I went to the chiropractor about a week later because my neck was still killing me. And it was kind of a funny story. This was the first time I went to the chiropractor. At this point, I had been having neck issues for a while, but I had just been putting it off. But now it was extreme. So I went to the chiropractor and I was super nervous because the last thing I wanted to do was mess up my insurance at work. I didn't know how that would play a factor into it. So, as I'm doing the little interview or whatever with the chiropractor, he asks me specifically, he's like, did you do anything to hurt yourself or you blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, nah, I don't know what it is. I don't know if I've been sleeping wrong or what. My neck has just been killing me. So he's like, all right, let's do some x-rays and we'll see what it looks like. So he does the x-rays. He comes back and he walks in and I could just tell by the way he's looking at me. He sits down and he's like, okay, all right, man. So tell me what really happened. And I'm like, nothing, man. My neck's just been bothering me. And he's like, look, you're not going to bullshit me. He's like, there's no way that this right here just happened. He's like, this looks like you've been taking a lot of impact. He's like, the way your neck is positioned right now, it's not right. Something happened. And then I was like, he's like, just be straight with me. And I was like, all right, man, look, I was like, is this going to be like off the record or whatever? He's like, dude, this has nothing to do with insurance. Just tell me. He's like, I just want to fix you. So then I told him what I do and everything. And he was like, I knew it, man. He's like, your spine. And at this point, he's talking about my whole spine is like curved just from the impact that I've been taking. And he just told me, he's like, we're going to be able to fix you up, but you got to be honest with me. And if anything happens, you need to come in like immediately and let me readjust you, because I want to fix you and I want you to be good. And I went there for about 8 months straight. And I'll tell you, after suffering from neck pain for multiple years, within 4 months, I had no more neck pain. And to this day, my neck still doesn't bother me. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to do the same for my back, which I did give him like a full year to try. And I guess it's just too far gone. And I'm too afraid to go to the doctor to see what the doctor says. I'll just deal with the pain. I'm not getting surgery on my back. Now, as far as being injured in the ring, you can go ahead and forget about any kind of responsibility being on the promoter's end, because the first thing they're going to make you do before you step in that ring is to sign a waiver. They're going to make you sign a waiver that states that if you get hurt, it's completely on you. It doesn't matter if the other wrestler drops you directly on your head when you put your faith in him to protect you. That doesn't matter. You're on your own. So make sure you got insurance, or make sure you're okay with being hurt and not being able to do anything about it. Because at the end of the day, the promoters, at least the ones that I worked with, they don't really care about your health, especially the shady ones. They don't care about you. The only thing they care about is that you produce, that you bring in some money. And a lot of them don't even want to do the promoting job themselves. They want you to promote. So if you work for a promoter who's telling you to push the show all the time, and it is stressing you and all the other guys on, you need to go out there and you need to, promote this show, you need to post on IG, you need to post on Facebook, and this and that and this and that. That's bullshit. That's a shady ass promoter. That's somebody that doesn't want to do their job. They're only in it for the money. They're a con artist is what they are. It's like it's terrible business. So if your promoter, or if the guy that you're talking to or thinking about wrestling for is any of these things, run. Now, at the time, all the pain was worth it because I was getting that gratification from wrestling. But I will be honest, if I could go back in time, I probably would have quit a lot sooner than I did, because now I'm still dealing with the pain. And all I have are some videos and some pictures and some memories and a few connections that I made over the years of wrestling. Something that's not worth the pain that I experience from day to day. Another thing you'll need to think about is merchandise. That's going to have to be something that you're going to want to invest in. You'll need to figure out, what's your budget? Are you going to be able to have merchandise and all your gear and stuff? Because again, if you want to make any money in wrestling, you're not getting it from the promoter. So you better learn how to create merchandise yourself, or you better have the funds to have some made for yourself. Me personally, I made my own merchandise, from t-shirts to bandanas, 8x10s, all that stuff. I would go buy shirts in bulk. I got a vinyl cutting machine. I got a heat press, and I was making all of my shirts, and I was doing good. Some shows I might make $50. Another show I might make $150, but it was all merchandise. And even that was a lot of work, for one t-shirt, it would probably cost me $10 to make it. I would sell it for 20, but it would take me 30 minutes to make the shirt. So this was work, this was work itself. Um, Now, luckily, there's some good fans out there who want to support you more. So you're going to have those fans where when they ask you for a t-shirt, you tell them, $20. And they'll say, nah, man, here's 30 or here's 40, because all the other guys paid to have all their merchandise made, and they're charging $30 to $40 for a t-shirt. So they're looking at it like that's the standard price. They want to support you, and they know what it costs. They know what you go through. So the fans are cool. The wrestling fans are what it's all about. Your promoters and your guys in the back that are with you, they're not going to take care of you like the fans are, because they don't care. Aside from making the additional money when you sell your merch, it's more of a gratification to come out to the ring and see the fans that are wearing your merchandise, because that's what's going to really show the promoters, and it's going to show everybody else who the people really came to see. And luckily enough, I always had a lot of people in the crowd wearing my merchandise, And I think that was one of the things that kept getting me booked, because you couldn't ignore it. If they were buying the merchandise, they were there to see me. So merchandise is going to be one big thing that you want to focus on, but you better have a gimmick and you better have real gear yourself, because if not, you're not going to sell any merchandise. How would you even theme it? What's it going to look like? Have a character, have some good strong character development, and make some merchandise that goes well with it. For me, I was crew Lavish, so I had all my sayings. Um, I had my shirts. He's cruising for a bruising, and then I called my fans the Crusaders and the Cruiserweights. Um, I incorporated my name into all my moves. I did a scissor kick like Booker T, and I called it the Crew Cut. I did the Steiner recliner, but I called it Cruise Control because it looks like you're driving. So be smart with your move set. Be smart with everything. When you're coming up with your name and when you're coming up with your gimmick, think about how you could use it, how you could play on the words, how you can make this name and this gimmick for your character fit into everything else. And your merchandise and your slogans and everything will fall right in line with it. Now, I'd say where wrestling helped me the most was it really gave me a chance to open up my social life. I got a lot better with people, and I got a lot better with kids. Um, like I said, when I first got into wrestling, I had just had my son, and up until this point, I'd never even held a baby. My son was, and to this day, he's still the only baby that I've ever held, and I probably will never hold another baby just because I don't want to hold anybody else's baby. But I was never great with kids. I was always awkward with kids. It was just weird to me. But being a wrestler really made me appreciate kids, and I learned how to communicate with them, and just it was awesome, to have kids coming up to you asking for your autograph, and you can just see it in their eyes that you're like the star to them. Because even though you may know on a small level you're not really anything, well, on a big level you're not really anything, but to that kid, you're a star. You're big because they're there to see you, and you're there doing something that they're dreaming about doing themselves when they get older. So the kids make it awesome. They were the best part about it. But not only that, meeting everybody else, and as I say, fans were always cool, even the ones that I was, talking shit to during matches. There may be a group of guys with all their girlfriends, and I would come up and just, hit on their girlfriends in front of them and talk shit to the guys and say all kinds of things to them. But the second the show was over, they were coming back trying to catch me, or during intermission coming up to me telling me how awesome I was, and it was great just really being able to meet new people and just put myself out there, to where I pretty much had to start socializing more. So it helped me a lot with my social circle, and my social skills, really improved, and and it helped me with my confidence with everything. So, and even this, talking on camera, because I did a lot of promos just like this, and I did a lot of promos with somebody else holding the camera. And the first few times it was awkward, but after I did it for so long, I just became, naturally, I'm organic. I could speak on a camera, so it kind of comes into play with what I'm trying to do now with this whole YouTube channel. So I learned a lot from it, and I did gain a lot from wrestling, and it did help with confidence a lot too, because you come into it not really sure about who you are or if you're good enough. And if you are good enough, you'll figure it out. You'll see it because the fans will let you know every time. If you're not getting a reaction, then you're not doing something right. So always remember that you need to be doing something while you're in the ring. A good way that I try to look at it is, it's not what you do in the ring, it's what you do in between the things you do in the ring. You need to know how to work the crowd. You need to get the crowd engaged in the match, because if you're just running in there doing a bunch of moves, it's not going to get you anything but oohs and ahs. And that's cool. It's great to have a good skill set, a good move set, and be able to do some amazing moves and be really athletic. But if you can't make it mean something, then nobody's going to remember it. I can guarantee you that I could come out and cut a promo and piss people off to the point where they go home talking about that more than they're talking about the match that had no real substance, but just was full of a bunch of cool moves. Because at the end of the day, what are they going to say? Oh, did you see when he did that one flip off the rope? Yeah, I saw that. That was badass. That's where it starts and that's where it ends. But if I come out and I know how to work the crowd and I'm working the crowd throughout that entire match, then I'm giving them lots of things to talk about throughout the match, you know. So think about that. And the cool thing about it is wrestling kind of carried over to my life in general. So now at least 50% of the people that I know call me Crew's Collections. That'd be why. They know me if they either met me at a wrestling show or they met me at a time when I was wrestling. So naturally, that's just what they wanted to call me. So it's still cool because to a lot of people, I'm still Crew. And there's been times where I'll go out and I'm still, recognized locally in the area. I may go to the store and I had somebody one time I was in Walmart and I had a guy, this was just 3 or 4 months ago, a guy, I was in the toy aisle actually checking out the action figures, and there was a younger guy probably in his like early 20s working stocking the shelves, and I walked up and I'm looking at him and I could see him, he's just looking at me in the corner of his eyes. He starts talking, I have my earphones in, so I pull them out and I'm like, hey, what's up, man? And he's like, you look like that wrestler guy, what is Crew Lav? And I correct, I was like, Crew Lavish? And he was like, yeah, I was like, yeah, that's me. Yeah, it's me, buddy. Yeah, nice to meet you, Crew Lavish. So it's like things like that still happen to this day. I still run into people. Another funny story, I went to Orlando. This is my biggest bragging moment, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and give you this quick story. I went to Orlando. I went to Universal Studios a couple years ago with a friend, and I was in a tattoo shop. I went to get a tattoo, and so we go in, we talk at the front desk, tell them what I want, blah 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 blah. So I get carried back. I get in my seat, and I'm starting to get a tattoo, right? And the girl that had been working the front desk, she keeps looking at me. And finally she comes over and she said, hey, can I ask you a question? I'm like, yeah, what's up? She's like, are you a wrestler? And I just kind of started laughing and I looked over at my friend because they heard it and I was already giving them shit. Um, at the time, I was already giving them shit because I'm like, you're with a star. I'm playing the whole Crew Lavish gimmick already. I do it all the time, everywhere I go. I'm like, you're lucky to be with me, because you're with a star today. So we might get some attention, shit like that. But anyway, so the moment this girl asks me that, I look over at my friend and she's just looking at me like, oh boy, here we go. So I'm like, yeah, I did. I was like, have you been to some of the shows? Because now I'm feeling confident as hell. My ego's boosted because I'm like, shit, I'm all the way in Orlando. I'm states away and they know me. You know what I'm saying? So I said, have you been to some of the shows or something? And she's like, nah, I've never been to the show. She's like, I used to live in Savannah. And she said, there used to be a store in the mall called Think Geek. And she's like, you came in there one day and like all the workers were like running in the back, like fucking going crazy, saying, oh, Crew Lavish is here. Crew Lavish. She was like, I didn't know who you were, but I came out to see. And she's like, so I recognize you from that. And at first I'm like, damn, so she didn't even know who I was. But then it was even cooler because she's telling me that like all the other staff members were running back there, like making a big deal about it. And it was funny. It was funny because this was right after the whole COVID situation too. And I remember the day that she's actually talking about. I actually kind of got kicked out of the store because they asked me to wear a mask, and I was like, I don't have a mask. She's like, well, you got to leave. I was like, all right, see ya. So I thought it was kind of funny because I remembered the exact situation, but it's like at the time I'm thinking, oh, they're being assholes. They're kicking me out of here just because I don't have a mask. But that's just the person at the front. Everybody else is in the back, and they're going crazy because I'm here. You need to go talk to them back there because if you knew who I was, you wouldn't be kicking me out of the store. So thank Geek, the store. I would be trying to put y'all out of business right now for that. But you're already ran out of business. That place has been shut down for a couple years now. So whatever. Now, another thing that I want to stress is the time away from my family and the damage that it caused. I'm no longer with her, not with my son's mom. It took a big toll on everything, and if I had to be completely honest with you, I would say that it was the snowball. It created the snowball that caused us to separate in the first place. It was a selfish thing for me to do, to take this on, and it's something that I'll never be able to take back. I had a great experience with wrestling, but it was very selfish, and that's something that you need to understand if you're going to get into this business, is that you're going to have to be selfish with it, and you may lose some people along the way, because not everybody's going to be there for it, and not everybody's going to understand what you're doing or why you're doing it forever. So keep that in mind and decide whether or not that's something that you want to sacrifice or potentially sacrifice, because you know you're going to miss some important moments. There's going to be times when shows are booked. You know, you might be able to miss a training session, but you can't miss your shows, because if you miss your shows, you're pushing yourself further down that card. You don't want somebody else to take that spot. So there may be birthdays that you're going to miss. There may be holidays, other celebrations. There's going to be times when people need you that you're not going to be able to be there, or you're going to have to make that decision of what's more important for you at that moment. And again, that's going to require some selfishness. Now, I will say, for probably the last year of wrestling was probably the hardest on me, and that's why I quit, because this was at a point where my son's mother and I had split apart. So I was single, I was on my own, I was living on my own. At this point, I really didn't have anything other than wrestling and the gym. You know, I still had my son, but I was only seeing him every so often. So I was kind of alone in my head all the time, and those long those long rides from, you know, one show to another would really take a toll on you and really make you start weighing out what you're doing with your life. Then you start thinking about your career, you start thinking about your family, you start thinking about, you know, what's important. And with enough thought, I finally decided that I had other things that I needed to focus on that were more important and that could pay off more than what I was getting from wrestling. Um, you know, it was a fun thing, but for the last year, it just wasn't fun anymore. It became more of a job. Um, and I didn't watch wrestling anymore. It made me, you know, when you're doing it all the time, you don't really care to watch it anymore. And another thing that I'll say is it will change your whole perspective on how you watch wrestling. You know, so if you really love watching wrestling and you enjoy it for what it is, think about that as well, because that is more than likely going to change once you learn how to wrestle and once you've done it yourself, because you're going to start looking at wrestling matches and picking them apart. You're going to notice every single little thing. You're going to notice punches that don't connect. You're going to notice botches. You're going to notice just bad spots in general, bad landings. You're going to see when they're calling moves. You're going to notice everything. You're going to be critiquing every match that you watch. It's not going to be viewed the same as it has been forever before that point. So just keep that in mind. That may be important to some, may not be important to others, but it's important to me because I can't enjoy wrestling in the same manner that I used to, especially now that I know everything that goes into it. But it can be cool sometimes because, you know, if you're with somebody, sometimes you can call exactly what's going to happen before it even happens. And that impresses people. But it sucks for me because I don't want to know what's going to happen. But it's how it is. So now it's been about a year and a half, year and a half, somewhere around there since I have wrestled. I think my last wrestling match was at the Savannah Comic Con, which was really a goal of mine because I love wrestling and I love comics. So the fact that I finally had the opportunity to wrestle at a really big show with a lot of people that enjoyed wrestling and enjoyed all the other things that I love was very um, satisfying to me. You know, that's going to forever be my favorite show. It wasn't the biggest. I don't know. There may have been 300 or 400 people there. So it was one of the bigger shows, but is definitely will go down in history as my favorite show. Plus, my son was there, so that makes it even better for me. Um, it's a memory that I'm going to hold forever, and I felt like it was the best way for me to go out. And I'm just super stoked that I got that opportunity and that I've got some footage of it. I've got some pictures. So, ultimate goal was completed. I wanted to wrestle at a Comic-Con. That's what I did. And there are some days that I miss it. You know, I sit around a lot of the times thinking, you know, will I ever do another show? You know, do I want to ever do a show? And I'd like to say that, yeah, there may be a time again that I do it. But like I said before, if I'm ever going to wrestle again, it's going to be on my grounds. It's going to be on my stipulations, or I'm not going to wrestle. You know, it's going to be like Hulk Hogan. It doesn't work for me, brother. But now that I'm not wrestling, it's allowed me to put my life together and figure out other aspects. Because at the end of the day, it's not all about wrestling. It's not all about anything, really. You need to have balance. You need to have structure with everything. More than anything, you need to have a career figured out because wrestling, making it in wrestling and making money in wrestling is there's a very slim chance. You're going to have to give it everything. You're going to have to be the right age. And again, there's no cutting corners. If you're going to commit to it, commit fully inside and outside of the ring. There are days that I miss it, but I do not regret stepping away from it. It's allowed me to expand my life, um, create my own business, um, focus more time on my son, you know, which is a very big thing for me. There's nothing I enjoy more than spending time with my son, especially as the older he gets. He's fallen in love with wrestling as well. So maybe, you know, maybe one day we can live vicariously through my son because he'll have, you know, a father that really supports him and knows the ins and outs of the business and how to get involved and has some connections. Uh, but that's not something that I'd ever push on him. But for that matter, we still do wrestle, or I still do wrestle because every weekend that I have him, that's all he wants to do is have wrestling matches in the living room. If we're not having wrestling matches, we're playing wrestling video games or we're playing with wrestling action figures, which is awesome. And that beats wrestling any day, you know. It could still be painful because he's a tough little kid, but it's worth it. And the pay is a lot better because I get paid with joy through the time I have with my son. Now, to break it down into some simple questions. If someone were to ask me, should I become a pro wrestler? This is what you need to ask yourself. Are you willing to sacrifice everything? Is this something that you really want to pursue? Or is it just something that you want to do temporarily? You need to know for certain. Neither one of those reasons is wrong, but you need to know why. You can't go into it blindly, and you need to have a timeline put on it. If it's something you're going to take seriously, set yourself a certain amount of time. You know, don't keep going and hoping. You know, give yourself a window of time that seems considerate, you know, that seems possible. And if things aren't where they should be, by the time that comes along, maybe reconsider and just go ahead and write it off. If it's something you just want to do because you want to be a weekend warrior, then hey, I say do it. Ride it till the brakes, you know, fall off, or the wheels fall off, or the brakes run down. Do whatever you want to do, really. But, you know, don't expect much out of it if you're not willing to give it everything that you've got. Now, the ugliest truth about the business, I'd say, is that you've got no friends in it and you're not going to have much support. Don't expect your friends and family to be there. Don't expect them to be pushing your stuff on social media. Don't expect them to be at shows. Don't expect them to be wearing your t-shirts. Don't expect anything from anyone you know. And honestly, it's better that way, because you don't want to be the guy that sold 10 tickets, but it's everybody that's in your family. You want to create real fans. You want your followers on social media to be actual followers who are into pro wrestling. You want to earn real fans. Don't be the guy that's just got a lot of family support, because people see through it, and it's, at the end of the day, you're going to see through it yourself. You know, you can have as many seats full as possible, but if they're all people that you already know, it's not impressing anyone. And more than anything, it's not impressing you deep down. You want actual fans, so do what you got to do to create them. Now, the most beautiful part of wrestling, I'd say, is not the way that you feel in an egotistical manner, but the way you feel like you're doing something positive. Because again, it comes down to the kids, and there's no payment that beats the way that these kids will look at you, and just the joy that you could see in their faces when you're taking pictures with them, and you know, when you're shaking their hands, or you're giving them hugs, or you're signing their autographs, or you're signing their t-shirt that they're wearing. Nothing beats that. The kids are going to be the best thing, at least for me. Now, if I could go back and do it all again, I would. I would do it all again, but I would have put a time limit on it, and I would have went into it knowing that there was a time limit, and knowing that I wasn't trying to make anything from it, because at the end of the day, the truth is I went into it not knowing where it was going to go, but I was in the ride for it as long as I could manage to keep up with it, and I was hoping that it would go as far as possible. I don't believe that was the right mindset. I think that I should have put a time stamp on it. 2 years. I'm going to do this for 2 years, and I'm going to make the most of it. If I'm not excelled to the top by 2 years, I'm out. You know, I feel like that would have really made a difference in my life, and a lot of things could have ended up differently had I had that figured out to begin with. And I would probably be further on this new journey of life that I am now had I made that decision. All in all, you know, it's a long road. It's a long road. It's a fun one. It's a hard one. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of joy. There's a lot of loss, and there's not much to gain. That's the sad part about it. Maybe that's the ugliest truth. There's not much to gain, but there's a lot to lose in the world of professional wrestling, especially in the indies coming up. So, if this is something that you've considered or are considering, I hope this video gives you a better outlook of some of the things you could experience, and helps you weigh out your options of whether or not this is something you want to pursue or not. At the end of the day, I don't want to discourage anyone, but I don't want to encourage anyone, because I know what it did to me and what it did for me. I know what it took from me. I know everything that I sacrificed and lost through it all, and the things that I still deal with today after making that choice. So either way, I hope this video is helpful for you. If it is, give me a thumbs up and like this video. Subscribe for more, because I'm always talking about wrestling. I'm always talking about action figures. This is Cruise Collections after all. But we talk about a lot of stuff on here, and it's going to expand more and more. So if you're a wrestling fan, if you're a comic fan, if you're an action figure fan, or if you're just a fan of pure entertainment, because I am, after all, Lavish, then go ahead and subscribe. Catch me on my next videos, because I'm going to always be here, and I'm going to continue to make content for you, talking to you, and for that guy, and hopefully I'll get some women subscribers at sometimes, because right now I'm thinking I'm at like 100% men, which is cool, because I realize that this kind of stuff isn't really what most women are into. But hey, we're working on building that women audience as well. So maybe I'll have to bust out the Crew Lavish gimmick for one of the next videos coming up. But until then, until next time, ladies and littlemen, this is Crew Lavish cruising out.